My boyfriend and roommate unexpectedly forced me to act out scenarios from my fanfic fantasies without my permission, leaving me with the difficult choice between involving the police or running away. A lot happened in such a short window of time that I'm still dizzy from it all. Honestly, I'm confused and more than a bit scared. It started with my boyfriend apparently finding the blog where I write and post fanfiction in my spare time. Now, this wasn't some deeply hidden secret, I've mentioned it to him before, but he just never seemed interested. Most of what I write is perfectly SFW, but yes, there's some NSFW content mixed in. Only about 10% of that NSFW stuff is actually my own kink. I wrote those because I personally thought they were hot. The rest are commissions that people literally paid me to write, and I want to make it clear, most involve kinks and fetishes I have zero personal interest in. I wrote them because that's what the clients wanted, and as long as it didn't cross my hard limits or make me seriously uncomfortable, I had no problem writing their fantasies. But it isn't my cup of tea, plain and simple. So my boyfriend somehow reads some of my NSFW stories and, fine, okay, he got a few ideas for things we could try together. Normal enough, sure. But here's where everything goes off the rails. Instead of, talking to me about it in private, he thought it would be more real and sexy to surprise me. And to do this he decided to rope in his friend, who also happens to be our roommate. My boyfriend is bi, but I always assumed our roommate was straight, so who knows how that conversation went down. Either way, they hatched this surprise idea, and plan to spring it on me when I get home from shopping. When I walk in the door, the roommate tells me my boyfriend went to visit his parents, who live just 10 minutes away. No big deal. I start putting groceries away while he helps me out, but as soon as we finish, I turn around and he's standing 3 inches from me, backing me up against the fridge. I've never felt nervous around him before, but in that moment, I was seriously scared. He was acting weird, invading my space, and looming over me. I told him, back up, but he refused. Instead, he told me he knew I liked him, something that had only been barely true almost a year ago, but by the time we'd started living together, that crush had evaporated. I'd never so much as entertained any thoughts about acting on it because I was already in a relationship. Now I was mad. He looked at me like he understood me better than I understand myself. He suggested we should get closer. He made it sound much grosser than that, and said my boyfriend wouldn't have to know. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These two have known each other almost a decade. I barely had time to say what? Before he leaned down and kissed me. Just like that, everything seemed to happen in fast forward, but I bit him on the mouth, hard enough to break the skin. As soon as he pulled back, I didn't hesitate. I punched him straight in the face. Asshole ended up on the floor, yelling. I grabbed my phone and was seconds from calling 911 when, out of nowhere, my boyfriend came rushing out of the roommate's room, totally panicked. He saw the roommate on the floor bleeding, me backed up against the fridge with blood on my mouth, and his eyes just went huge. Everything after that is kind of a blur. Soon, all three of us were screaming at each other. Eventually it came out, my boyfriend had found my blog, shared it with the roommate, and together they'd decided that my stories must mean I was projecting all my sexual desires onto the characters. That was the reason behind this whole episode. My boyfriend thought I'd be into acting out one of the fics, with the roommate, apparently. I screamed at him that he was absolutely insane and that the vast majority of those stories were commissioned work. People paid me to write them. I was shaking. I was, and still am, so fucking furious. But even more than that, I felt so sick. I'd been so scared, thinking I might get assaulted in my own home by someone I'd trusted. My boyfriend tried to apologize, but I told him to fuck off. I grabbed enough clothes to fill a bag and left. My sister took me in, and when she opened the door I just fell apart. I scared her and her daughter, which I feel so bad about. When I could finally stop ugly crying, I told my sister everything and she said I should call the cops and report them. I don't know if that's too drastic, but the whole thing feels so violating. Since then, I haven't answered any calls from my boyfriend, nor listened to any of his voicemails. I don't have it in me yet. I also haven't responded to the roommate, who's texted some apologies that just come off as hollow. I'm just lying here on her couch, alone, well past midnight, still terrified and unsure about what to do next. All I know is this, my boyfriend, aside from this, has honestly been a great partner. Neither of us is perfect. But this is a whole new level of fucked up, and I feel completely lost about what to do. Do I talk to him? End things? Just disappear? Right now, I don't even know how to take the first step forward. Update 1. After everything that happened, I was honestly shocked by the outpouring of attention and support I received. The sheer volume of people reaching out and offering advice made me take a real step back. It finally hit me how serious this whole situation actually was. I realized I couldn't just brush it off, and the encouragement I got steered me towards making the smartest decision for myself. The more I thought about it, the more it became clear, there was absolutely no way to salvage the relationship, not after what he did. How can I keep dating someone who would willingly go through with something so despicable without even once considering if it was something I'd ever want? At best, it meant he was insanely reckless and selfish. At worst, well, I can't even let my mind go to how malicious it might have truly been. Either way, he doesn't deserve to be in my life. So, boyfriend is now officially ex. A few days after everything exploded, I finally sat down and made myself listen to all the voicemails and read through the flood of texts, both from him and from RM. I hoped for some insight or even a shred of understanding about what was going through their minds, but almost every message was just them pleading for forgiveness, making excuses, and trying to sweep it all aside. It was a mistake. We didn't think it would hurt you. We were just trying to do something nice. We thought you'd like it. Over and over, they begged me to just talk to them. It was textbook gaslighting, exactly like some people had warned me they'd try. Their messages gradually shifted from begging to being exasperated and then openly annoyed when I didn't respond. Eventually, my ex asked me not to do anything crazy like go to the police because, according to him, it was all just a misunderstanding. He said if I did, it could ruin how people saw them, or worse. That was when it really hit me. Neither of them actually felt bad for what they'd done. They didn't care about the trauma they caused me, they were worried about their own reputations. They were only scared I'd tell people. I took the advice I'd gotten and went to the police. I can't predict if it will go anywhere, but I knew it was the right move, not just for myself but in case they ever try something like this again with anyone else. My sister was by my side the whole time, sitting with me in the station while I laid it all out for the officer. I handed over every message, every voicemail. To their credit, the officer actually seemed to take it seriously. Whether anything comes of it, I can't say yet. As for facing them, I wasn't ready. I needed to get my things out of the apartment, though, so I waited until I knew both my ex and RM were at work. Their shifts overlapped a few times a week. As soon as their cars left the lot, my sister, brother-in-law, mom, and I swooped in. We grabbed everything of mine, and I mean everything: the microwave, the living room TV, all the spices and kitchen stuff, half the cleaning supplies, the lazy boy chair, the washer/dryer, and a bunch of other odds and ends, plus all my personal stuff. They'll survive. There's a laundry room in the complex and neither of them ever really cooked anyway. When they got home to an empty apartment and realized I'd been there while they were at work, my phone exploded with calls and messages from both of them. I answered with a simple message: I wasn't coming back, my relationship with my ex was over, I'd taken everything that was mine and left their key on the table, even snapped a picture for proof, and the door was locked behind me. Their main panic was how are we going to pay rent now? Even though they both make enough to cover it until they find a new roommate, if they aren't blowing it on something ridiculous. I was never on the lease, so I knew I was legally in the clear. I ended it simply: I wanted absolutely no further contact, ever, from either of them. I told them that if they contacted me again in any way, I'd go straight for a restraining order, then blocked them both everywhere, not waiting for their replies. So far? Silence. At least, as far as I know. I'm still not great. But I feel lighter than I have in weeks. The anxiety is still there, but sleep is coming easier, and I've taken a few days to recover before heading back to work. I'm soaking up every moment I can with my niece, spending more time with my sister and brother-in-law. It feels good to be around people who care about me. I also set up a remote session with a therapist and will finally get to talk to someone who can help me process this properly. Looking back, I'm grateful for the wake-up call I desperately needed. I was so close to letting my feelings for my ex cloud my judgment. But none of that matters. If someone can do what they did to me, then whatever love they claimed to feel was never real. Someone like that doesn't deserve forgiveness, and I refuse to give it to them. Update 2. 2 mornings after I blocked them, I was sitting at my desk trying very hard to pretend answering emails was normal again when the front desk pinged me that someone had dropped off flowers from adjacent. I told them to toss them. 10 minutes later, I got up to fill my water and saw him through the glass by the lobby doors. He had that look people get when they're about to talk you into forgiving them, and my whole body just went cold. I didn't go out there. I told our office manager and she called security. They walked him off the property while he tried to tell them I'd want to hear him out. I went to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and shook until my hands didn't feel like someone else's. That was my line in the sand. I left work and went straight to the courthouse for an emergency protective order. It turns out you don't have to be eloquent, you just have to tell the truth. The clerk handed me a pen and said to write what happened and why I was scared, and I wrote it all down with my hand cramping around the last paragraph. A judge read it, glanced at the printouts of the texts I'd brought, and signed off on temporary orders against both of them. The deputy who served them called me a few hours later and said it was done. I slept for 6 full hours that afternoon like a bear after winter. The real plot twist came out of nowhere. The next day, a woman I didn't know messaged my sister asking if she could get in touch with me. She turned out to be RM's ex. They'd dated briefly last year. She'd seen his vague "men are innocent until proven guilty" rant on Facebook and texted him to ask what on earth he was talking about, and he, because he is exactly as stupid as he is bold, decided to brag. He sent her screenshots from a messenger chat where he and my ex had planned a little surprise for me. He actually typed the words "she'll fight at first but she'll melt," and I think I blacked out for a second when I read it. My sister forwarded everything to me. I forwarded it to the detective assigned to my report. That kicked everything into gear. The detective asked me to come in that afternoon. He was gentle in that professional, practiced way people learn when their job is dealing with people when the worst thing has just happened. He'd already screened the screenshots and told me they were a big deal. He asked if I'd be willing to do a pretext call. Basically, I sit in a room with him and another officer, they record, and I call my ex from a blocked line and ask neutral questions that might get him to say, on tape, what they did and why. It felt like sticking my hand back into a hornet's nest, but I said yes. I wish I could say I was brave on that call. The truth is my voice kept wanting to disappear. He picked up on the second ring, rushed out a baby? And I had to swallow hard before I could speak. I said I wasn't calling to fight and I wasn't going to unblock him, I just needed to understand why he and RM thought that was okay. There was a pause and then he started talking. He blamed RM for kissing me too early. He said I always wrote about wanting to be taken. He said he was going to stop it if I really didn't want it. He said if I could just tell the cops we were testing boundaries, it would all blow over. The detective wrote something on a legal pad and slid it to me. Keep him talking. I asked, so the plan was you and he would surprise me? And he said, it was my idea, he just helped. All of that is recorded. When I hung up my hands wouldn't stop shaking again, but this time they were shaking with relief. The detective told me to go home and lean on my people. Then he called me the next morning and said the DA's office had agreed to pursue charges for misdemeanor sexual battery against RM for the kiss and a conspiracy charge for both of them. He warned me it can still be a long, boring road full of continuances and delays and nothing is guaranteed, but he sounded a little surprised, in a good way, that it was moving. He also suggested I apply to make the temporary protective orders permanent. I did. Meanwhile, their damage control shifted into high gear. They couldn't contact me anymore without risking arrest, so they tried to go around me. My ex's mom called my sister. I braced myself for a mother bear defense of her son, but she was crying before my sister even said hello. She asked if she could talk to me. I said yes, mostly because I needed to know what story he was circulating. She didn't try to talk me out of anything. She apologized for her son like it was the only sentence she knew, and then she told me she'd seen the screenshots because RM had messaged her too, apparently fishing for sympathy. She told me she believed me, she told me she was disgusted with both of them, and then she asked for my address to return the Christmas ornament I'd left at their house last year. I told her to give it to my sister. We hung up without any illusions, but I didn't expect to feel lighter afterward. I did. I also finally did something that felt small and huge at the same time. I got my own place. My coworker's roommate moved out unexpectedly and she offered me the second bedroom for a few months while I figure out my next step. It's quirky and a little too warm and the water pressure makes me laugh, but it's mine. My brother-in-law and my mom schlepped boxes up the stairs while my niece drew a sign for my door in marker that says Auntie's Fort with a crooked little heart. I hung it anyway. I slept there the first night and woke up without that split-second burst of panic because I didn't know whose footsteps I was hearing. The only footsteps were mine. There was one last kick on the way out. Their property manager emailed me to say my ex had filed a theft complaint over the washer/dryer and the TV. I emailed back every receipt with my name on it and told them to forward the police report number if they needed it. I didn't hear another word. I keep waiting for the moment when this stops feeling like I'm watching someone else's life, and it hasn't happened yet. But I'm not in the apartment where I got cornered. I'm not waiting for a phone to light up with a message that will knock me off my axis, and there are very boring, very official pieces of paper that mean two specific people aren't allowed within 100 yards of me. That matters. I had my first full therapy session yesterday. I told her I felt ridiculous for being embarrassed about my writing when the problem was never my writing. She nodded and didn't say much and let me sit with that. On my way home, I stopped to pick up a cheap lamp and a basil plant that will probably die because I always overwater, and when I got back to my new place I opened my laptop and wrote for an hour. Not anything about what happened, just something soft and a little funny that had nothing to do with anyone who'd ever lived in my real life. When I finally closed my laptop, I realized I wasn't scared of it anymore. Update 3. I thought the high point of my week was going to be the basil not immediately keeling over, and then my phone chirped a reminder I'd been half ignoring, hearing at 8:30 a.m., protective order. I barely slept. The courthouse smelled like floor cleaner and cold coffee, and the fluorescent lights made everyone look seasick. A victim advocate met me in the hallway and walked me through how to breathe like it was a thing you could forget how to do. They were there when I walked in. Suits, hair tamed, the whole respectable costume. RM had a butterfly scar on his lip where my teeth had met him. My ex stared at the table like it might tell him what to say. The bailiff said our names like they were case numbers and the judge asked if I wanted to add anything to my petition. I told him yes, and I handed up the screenshots RM had bragged to his ex about, and the transcript of the pretext call the detective had given the DA. The judge read in silence long enough for my heart to think about going on without me. He granted it. 5 years, both of them, no contact, stay 100 yards away from me, my home, my job. He looked straight at them and said, the fact that it didn't go further does not make this less serious. My ex opened his mouth and their attorney put a hand on his sleeve. RM didn't look up. On the way out, the victim advocate squeezed my shoulder the way my mom does when she's saying I'm proud of you without making me cry in public. I sat on the steps outside the courthouse and shook and counted 10 buses go by before I trusted my legs to work again. It didn't stay quiet long. The detective called 2 days later, voice like he'd been holding a small, strange secret behind his teeth. RM took a plea. Guilty to misdemeanor sexual battery and conspiracy, 2 years probation, counseling, fines, and he agreed to testify to the planning. I didn't know how to hold that in my hands. The detective said it means they don't have to make me tell the story in a room full of strangers with a microphone. He also said the DA had amended the charge against my ex to add criminal solicitation based on the messages in the call. It's still not a movie, it's paperwork and dates and a line of people whose lives have each been pulled inside out for different reasons. But it's movement. And then the kind of stupid that makes you dizzy. A pale blue envelope was wedged under my apartment door one afternoon when I came home from work. No return address, just my first name in a handwriting I knew better than my own. I didn't touch it. I took a photo, slid it into a Ziploc with a spatula like it was a large bug, and called the detective. He picked it up an hour later. It wasn't just a violation because he reached me, it was a violation because he used someone else to reach me. The detective called back that night. The envelope had been delivered by a coworker of his, someone I'd met twice at barbecues, who told him he just wanted to help. The judge did not appreciate his goodwill. There's a bench warrant now for my ex for violating the order. They picked him up at his apartment before sunrise. It turns out the sound I've been wanting to hear for weeks is a door closing on someone else's choices. It was like the universe decided to empty the junk drawer all at once. Another woman came forward after the men are innocent post, this time not one of their exes, but a girl who used to play in their Tuesday rec league. She didn't have the words for what almost happened to her last spring, only that she'd stopped going because RM and my ex had joked about a surprise that didn't feel like a joke and then followed her out to her car. She opened a report of her own. I met her for 15 seconds in a hallway outside the DA's office when our appointments overlapped, just long enough for a nod and a shaky me too without any of the internet or their friends in the room. We didn't need more than that. The practical boring miracles kept appearing. A letter arrived about victim compensation. It means my therapy isn't going to become an equation I do at the grocery store when I'm deciding if I can afford avocados. My boss moved my desk to an interior spot away from the glass, and security added my ex and RM to the don't let in list without making it feel like I'm contagious. My sister brought over one of those peel and stick extra locks and we laughed like teenagers while we wrestled with the backing paper and tried not to slap it on crooked. The basil is still alive. I bought him a little terracotta saucer and named him Fort. The hearing for his arraignment happened yesterday. I didn't have to go, but I went anyway because my body needed to witness the wheel turn. He was smaller than he used to be. It's a weird thing to notice. He pled not guilty and the public defender asked for release on his own recognizance. The judge side-eyed the file and said no, not with the violation, and set conditions that read like a manual for how he's not allowed to exist near me. He looked for me when they turned him toward the door. I looked straight at the clock and waited for the second hand to drag itself to the top. Afterward I walked 2 blocks to a coffee shop I didn't know and ordered the sweetest thing on their menu like I was trying to make my blood remember joy. My therapist says sometimes you have to teach your nervous system new stories. I don't know if it counts as a story, but yesterday I took a shower in my too warm apartment with the weird water pressure and there were no sounds behind the door except for my cheap radio squeaking out an old song and my own awful singing. I dried off, sat cross-legged on my floor with a bowl of pasta, and opened my laptop. I wrote. Not about them. About a character who moves into a creaky place over a bodega and learns how to sleep through the sirens because none of them are coming for her. There's still a case number. There are still dates circled on a calendar. There's still a version of this where it takes detours I don't like. But I have keys that only I have copies of, a lock my sister installed crooked, a basil plant named Fort, and 5 years of quiet baked into a piece of paper a judge signed while 2 men I used to know became exactly what they chose to be. That matters more than anything I thought I was going to have to learn. Update 4. Fort has tiny white blossoms. I didn't know basil did that. I thought he'd just be leaves forever, but one morning there were little green fists at the tips and by dinner they'd open like they couldn't help it. I was still looking at them when my phone lit up with an email from a company I'd only ever known by a username. It had words like subpoena and production and your account. I sat down on the floor in my doorway because for a second my legs forgot what we were doing. The defense had served my platform, fishing for drafts, IPs, anything that could make a courtroom into a book club. I forwarded it to the detective and the ADA and wondered, stupidly, if fiction could feel embarrassed. It turns out you can ask a judge to say no to a fishing trip. We had a quick hearing about a thing that is not quick inside your body. Their lawyer said context. The ADA said irrelevant. The judge read for a while, took off his glasses, and said, we are not trying consent by proxy of fantasy. He signed the order and I swear you could hear my heartbeat roll its shoulders. When we stood up, their lawyer tried to smuggle a look over his paperwork like maybe if he could see me he could make me say something that would help. I looked at the seal on the wall and the shine on the wooden rail and pretended I was a photograph. RM's sentencing was 2 days later. I wrote a victim impact statement at my wobbly thrift store desk and rewrote it twice until it sounded like something I could say out loud without dissolving. The courtroom smelled like dust in a library nobody dusts. RM's butterfly scar had settled into his face like it belonged there. He kept his eyes on a place in the carpet 3 feet to my left. I said the things I'd practiced, that she'll fight at first but she'll melt is not a sentence you write about someone you know, that I hope he learns how to think a whole thought before he turns it into an action on a person's body. The judge called it what it was and read the terms he'd agreed to like a recipe: probation, counseling, fines, stay away for 5 years that match mine, community service that isn't picking up cans in a park at sunrise. RM turned his mouth toward the microphone and said he was sorry. It landed like a pebble in a swimming pool and sank without touching me. On the way out, a woman in a blue sweater with RM's eyes clutched her purse strap like it might float, and I felt this brief, strange mercy for a person whose son made a choice she will never be able to explain to herself. There was a march of paperwork and then a pivot. The ADA called to say RM sat down for his proffer and brought a memory like a ledger. His cooperation made my ex's world smaller. 15 minutes later, the ADA called back and said the plea offer that had been hovering got shorter. We showed up in a courtroom that looked exactly like all the other rooms where men in jackets make binding promises, and my ex pled guilty to solicitation and conspiracy, no jail time beyond the days on the violation, 3 years probation with counseling, a batterer's program even though he never got that far because the point is the thought and the plan, a technology clause that means he can't go playing make-believe through apps to get around a judge's words, restitution for the locks and the time I spent living somewhere that wasn't mine. He kept his eyes on the table again like it could pull him through. When the judge asked if he understood, he said yes, Your Honor, and it didn't sound like his voice from the phone that day. It sounded like a person who finally ran out of butt. There was a side quest I didn't think I'd want. The ADA asked if I wanted to make a statement at his sentencing too. I wrote one, then threw it away, then wrote a smaller one. I said, You turned my home into a plan. The judge looked at him like he was bored of watching people try to learn the same lesson. He added a condition I didn't know you could add: no third-party contact, spelled out with examples that were basically don't be clever. He told him to delete every copy of those chats from everywhere that isn't evidence, and then told him he doesn't get to curate a past that doesn't make him squirm. In between the court faces, I learned the texture of the ordinary again. I stood in the grocery store all under the same hard lights that saw me the night I got cornered, and my sister picked up a jar of pickles and unscrewed it with a small grunt and handed it to me like a magic trick. We bought popsicles. Back in my apartment, the extra lock sits a little crooked and clicks home with a sound that feels like a full stop at the end of a sentence. There was also a knock I didn't expect, and I didn't open the door because that's a new habit that lives in my bones now, but there was a muffled voice that said maintenance and then an older man with a toolbox who installed a real deadbolt over my peel and stick like he was hanging a picture. He chatted about a leaky pipe 2 floors up and told me to jiggle the key a little to the left. He had a tattoo of a ship on his forearm and hands that looked like they'd known wrenches longer than optimism. When he left, I tightened the new lock 3 times and laughed at myself alone in my doorway until I hiccuped. The internet tried to be a courtroom for a minute. A girl I barely know messaged me a screenshot of a group chat I was never in, a name I recognized from Tuesday Rec League, a joke that wasn't a joke months before this ever happened. The detective already had it through the proffer, but seeing my name typed in a box where I'd never been invited turned my stomach like I was carsick on a straight road. I sent it to the ADA anyway. It's strange how the same thing can be both over and not over at all. There were better strange things too. A little press emailed me asking if they could reprint a soft nothing of a piece I wrote on a night I thought I'd forgotten how to be gentle to myself. They offered a frankly insulting check that made me grin because it meant nobody owns my words who hasn't asked nicely. I took it. I bought a second lamp and a ridiculous mug that looks like a turtle. My coworker dragged a small desk up the stairs with me and we scraped the paint on the landing and apologized to the wall like it had feelings. The last thing, and it was small and huge, happened at 3 a.m. when the fire alarm went off and the whole building popped its eyes open. I stood in the hallway in my sleep shirt and socks holding Ford in his terracotta saucer like a baby, and the neighbor from across the way with a dog that looks like a loaf of bread said, "Burnt toast, 3rd floor, sorry," over the alarm. We smiled at each other in the red strobe wash and I put the basil down because I did not actually need to rescue a plant from a false alarm. The dog leaned its whole dogness against my shins like I belong on this floor, in this building, on this side of what happened. The dates are still on the calendar. Probation officers exist now as real people to me the way court clerks and bailiffs do. My therapist keeps asking me where in my body I feel safety, and I told her it used to be nowhere and now it's the place where a key turns and the click is just for me. Fort keeps throwing flowers he wasn't supposed to, and I keep catching myself doing things that look like living. I do not forgive them. I do not wake up to the sound of my phone buzzing with apologies. I wake up to traffic and someone's radio through the wall and my own breath coming back to me, and the steady, boring fact that a judge said out loud for the record, "Your imagination is yours. Your body is not anyone's story to act out." Update 5. Fort started to make seeds like he had a secret he couldn't keep. I googled what to do and learned you're supposed to pinch the blossoms if you want leaves, but if you let them go you get these little brown papery bells that rattle when you shake them. I cupped a few in my hand over a napkin and watched the tiny black commas fall out, like punctuation for some sentence I haven't written yet. I was still deciding if that made me sentimental or just sleep deprived when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't know and a voice that announced itself as probation. There was a hearing. Not the big dramatic kind, those were already done. This was a motion from my ex to modify conditions. He wanted permission to attend a family thing at a venue that sits inside my 100-yard bubble. He'd written in his request that the order was unduly burdensome. I made a noise I'm pretty sure only dogs can hear and emailed the ADA. 2 mornings later I sat on a back bench in a room that smelled like dry air and copier toner while a judge with the posture of a metronome listened to a man in a cheap suit say words like tradition and time sensitive. It wasn't a wedding, it was a barbecue in a rented hall 10 blocks from my office. The judge took off his glasses and cleaned them like he was looking for a smudge in the law. Then he asked the PO if there were 1,000 other halls in the county. The PO said, "Yes, Your Honor, there are 12,409. The judge didn't smile. He said the order stays as it is, and if you want to see your family, pick a different zip code. My ex stared at the table like he could tunnel through it. We were back out on the sidewalk in 6 minutes. I counted the cracks between the slabs and realized I'd been holding my shoulders up around my ears the whole time. When I let them drop, my bones made a sound like a knuckle popping. That would have been the whole day in another version of my life. Instead, the clerk called my name on a different calendar an hour later because the man who slid the pale blue envelope under my door, the co-worker with the barbecues, the good intentions delivery service, had his own hearing for facilitating a violation. He looked like he'd slept in the shirt he wore. He said he was just trying to help. The judge looked over his glasses at a point about 3 inches above the man's left shoulder and said, "Help looks like staying out of the way of a court order." He got a fine and a little speech about what no contact means when it doesn't directly apply to you but your hands are holding the string someone else tied. He didn't turn around when it was over. I didn't want him to. Some of this turned domestic in the most literal way and surprised me with how much it mattered. The email about restitution turned into a check that said my name were paid to the order of goes. It wasn't a fortune. It was paper the color of dishwater that paid for a new mattress and an actual bed frame that doesn't whine when I turn over, and a deadbolt that a human being with a toolbox installed while telling me stories about his grandkids' t-ball team. My sister held the screws in her palm like seeds and I said I'd plant them in the door. We laughed until the neighbor's dog, the loaf of bread one, barked once in solidarity. Her name, it turns out, is PETA. The Rec League sent an email I didn't know I needed. The subject line was sterile, the body was 3 paragraphs about code of conduct and participant safety, and then the thing that put cold air in my lungs: they are not welcome on any of our teams, in any of our gyms, on any of our benches. It's not a court order. It's a notice board and a guy with a clipboard and a set of keys that opens all the back doors. But those are the places where a lot of life happens for people who take Tuesdays and turn them into friendships. Somebody decided mine mattered in that space too. A different kind of letter hit me like walking into a glass door. Probation asked if I wanted to receive an accountability statement from my ex as part of his program. It would be vetted, it would not be contact, it would be an exercise in responsibility for him. I held the envelope at arm's length when it eventually came like it might bite. I sat down on my kitchen floor and stared at my trash can for a very long time, and then I slid the envelope into a drawer unopened and put a padlock on the idea of ever reading it. My therapist said sometimes refusing to be an audience is the only boundary that counts. Saying no doesn't always sound like no, thank you. Sometimes it's paper untorn. There was one last scrape with small claims that felt like a prank. He filed for equitable interest in the washer/dryer I'd bought. I brought receipts and a face that had nothing extra in it to a courtroom that looked like a school library that had lost all its books. The commissioner glanced at the dates, glanced at the order, and asked my ex if he had any proof it wasn't mine. He said something about we picked it out together. The commissioner said, "That's not a receipt," in the exact tone my aunt uses when I try to pass off a handful of pretzels as a side dish at Thanksgiving. Dismissed. I walked outside, leaned my head against a sun-warmed patch of the building's brick, and started laughing because it was either that or use up the last of the tears my body keeps in a jar. Somewhere in the middle of all the beige rooms and metal detectors, my housing situation shifted from temporary to mine. My coworker's roommate came back, and it turned out 2 bedrooms can feel very small when one of them is a waiting room where you leave your shoes in the last 8 months. I toured apartments with carpets that smelled like mushrooms and one place with a sink in the bedroom like a joke, and then I walked into a 3rd-floor studio with a window that looks at a line of sycamores and exactly one cupboard you have to touch with your thumb in a sweet spot to get it to close. The building is old without pretending to be historic. The hallways always smell like someone else is making rice. I signed. I slid keys across a desk with a potted fern and a stapler shaped like a whale, and the manager handed me a folder and said, "Welcome home," and for once those words didn't sag under their own weight. Moving looked like my mom wrapping my coffee mugs in dish towels because we'd run out of newspaper, and my brother-in-law taking the door off its hinges for 20 minutes because the new desk we bought decided physics was optional, and my niece sticking glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling in a pattern no galaxy would recognize. The first night in that room, I woke up at 3 because the building sighed and the radiator clinked to itself. I lay there and counted my own heartbeats until they slowed down. There is an enormous difference between being awake at 3 in the morning because you're afraid and being awake at 3 in the morning because your body hasn't realized the war is over. The internet tried one more stunt, because of course it did. A stranger with a username that looked like a license plate DM'd me a thread where someone in a sideline group, friends of the Tuesday cluster, had rewritten what happened into a story with all the verbs softened. They'd made up a version where I led them on with my writing and then panicked. The Ada already had the posts through RM's cooperation. Still, seeing the paint mixed into a color that wasn't mine put a taste in my mouth like pennies. I sent a screenshot to my therapist, not because she's a cop, but because she's the person who keeps saying, "Name how it feels." She texted back 2 words, "That hurts." We both left it there. On a better day, the little press that bought the soft piece I wrote sent a link to a reading at a tiny bookstore with a name that sounds like a cat. There were fold-out chairs and a man with a beard big enough to hide a harmonica in, and a microphone that whistled until someone smacked it on the side like a TV in 1997. I wore the jacket I keep for feeling like a person who has a place to be and read 2 pages about a woman buying blueberries too late at night. When I sat down, another reader squeezed my hand and said, "The Basil," like we both knew him. After, outside under a neon sign shaped like a moon, the girl from Tuesday Rec League found me. She had on sneakers and the kind of ponytail you get when your hands shake. We hugged like people who have never hung out but who have both tried to breathe drywall dust and call it air. She said she signed back up. I said I bought popsicles again. It felt like a do-over where the only requirement is that you try. Peter's person knocked the next weekend and asked if I could let her out at noon on Thursday because he had a thing. The dog looked at me like I was a couch she'd been promised. I went over on my lunch break and she pressed her warm loaf of a body into my shins while I clipped her leash. I stood in the courtyard and threw a tennis ball exactly 4 times because I had to go back to answering emails and pretending that ordinary is something you can nail to the floor, and on the 4th catch she trotted over to the base of my stairs like she'd decided to walk me home. The last strange, small miracle was feral and looked like taxidermy at first glance because he holds so still. A cat started appearing on the fire escape 3 nights in a row, thin and careful, with one ear folded like it had tried to remember how to be a triangle and got distracted. I opened my window just enough to set a bowl of water on the sill, and he sniffed it like it might be a trick and then drank for a long, long time. I named him Astro in my head for no reason except that stars are things you can see when the city allows it. I'm not adopting a cat. I'm feeding a guest who has a key to the night instead of a lease. It's a boundary that looks like a saucer. The calendar has fewer circles on it now. Probation exists the way the postal service exists. You don't think about it until a form shows up and then it does its job and your life moves one address forward. The judge's words live here like furniture. 5 years, stay away, don't be clever. The quiet is not perfect. There are moments when the building creaks and my lungs try to climb out through my throat, and then the radiator pops again and I laugh out loud because a heater shouldn't sound like popcorn. I made pasta with basil and spilled half a jar of sauce on my new counter and didn't cry about it. I taped fort seeds to an index card with tiny pieces of scotch tape like I was making a 7th grade science project. I wrote for 2 hours on a Tuesday about a character who finally lets herself make a mess and doesn't apologize to furniture. There are still men whose hands belong inside their own pockets. There are still doors that will open for them because doors don't have memories, but mine does. It makes a sound when it closes that I know better than my own name now. It's not a bang. It's not a thud. It's a click like a period at the end of a long, unpunctuated thought. I stand there sometimes with my hand on the knob and count to 10 on both sides of that sound. Fort is a little leggy and still trying to turn flowers into something else. Astro pretends he isn't waiting for me and then appears like a magician's reveal. Peta sighs like a person who has been reunited with her couch. I'm here. I'm not finished with this story because living doesn't have an epilogue, but the plot twist I didn't see coming is that nothing dramatic happens for whole hours at a time. The most surprising thing in my house is that my own imagination sits where it belongs again, not on trial, not evidence, just mine. The rest of me caught up.